Welcome back, everyone, to Afrodo Reviews. And this is the top 10 best books of 2025. So I'm sorry this is a little bit late. I wanted to publish this closer to the beginning of the year. At the very least, I wanted to publish it at the start of the year in the first month, but unfortunately, I really couldn't get around to it. I haven't had a lot of time to record anything, and most of what I put out so far is stuff I've recorded in December of last year or before. That's largely because, as normal around this time, my work schedule gets really dense, and I just don't get a lot of time to record. And when I do have time to record, I'm just so exhausted I can't summon the energy to do it. You might also know that I'm off camera, and that's because I was forced to get a haircut. There's a reason for it, but for now I'm just going to leave it at that so I can get on with the video. So, for those of you unfamiliar with my top 10 list, what I do is I take the top 10 either best or worst books of that year. Now, I'm not talking about books that were specifically published that year, but rather books that I read that year, and I have to have read them for the first time. So for things like my nostalgia month, I can't really bring it up again because, in my opinion, that doesn't count. I also only consider books for this. So even if I've read some amazing comic books or some really amazing short stories, I generally tend to leave them off and save them for an honorable mention. But for the most part, those are quickly the rules. Let's get into this. Number 10. Don't Get Blood in My House. So, Don't Get Blood in My House is at 10 despite having a rather low score in comparison to some of the others you'll see on this list, largely because I'm still kind of impressed with the story and how it managed to surprise me. Well, I try not to spoil in general for these best of lists, because this is effectively a list of recommendations from me to you. I think it's doubly important here because the biggest draw of this book is just how much you will not guess of where it's going. It's one of those books where it's just like at all times you're kind of just, okay, I didn't expect this to happen. And I won't lie and say that it's always a great thing. It's a lot like if you've watched the movie The Dead Don't Die with Bill Murray and Adam Driver. This book is like a written version of the spirit of that movie. And much like that movie, it's not the best book in the world, but it is very important because once you read enough, you just sort of start seeing all the painting on the wall as you read. So there's very few things that really surprise you. So for something that actually can surprise me, I gotta give it a little bit of credit. Plus, admittedly, I do have a soft spot in my heart for any book where the author personally requests that I take a look at it. So, number 9. The Last Bookstore on Earth. The Last Bookstore on Earth was one of the first books I reviewed last year that was published the same year. And honestly, it was one of the ones I definitely was on the other side of when it comes to the popular consensus. While I do agree it definitely has flaws, as my video would point out if you watch it, such as failing to utilize interesting concept that would have helped expand the world, and a rather limp delivery on the themes it claimed to be aiming for, I still mostly had a really good time reading this. It also featured a main character who actually felt like they were a reader, rather than a character whose quirk was that they could read. This isn't a book I'll promise will rock your socks off if you read it, but I do think this was a book that was overhated from where I last left it off. And honestly, I do recommend checking it out. Maybe I'm in the minority in liking it, but I think it has an interesting world, a nice chemistry between the two leads, and the story it tells is good, even if it doesn't deliver as satisfactorily on its themes as I think it thinks it does. I just recommend not taking the synopsis you find on the stores to heart about what it's trying to do. Just read it as it is. Number 8. The Underwild, River of Spirits. I stand by what I said in this review. I think the Underwild series has the potential to be the next Percy Jackson of this modern era. In addition to its beautiful cover art, I mean seriously, just look at this. It has a story that's fun to read and a main character who's interesting on top of that. While again, I don't agree with some of the deliveries on certain plot points, some of my disappointments are entirely what I wanted to see in the book rather than what the actual downside of the book was. There were some things I really wish the author had done instead of this, but I can't fault a book for not doing what I wanted it to do. I think it's a book worth checking out. The reason it's only at number 8 on my list is because it is still a kid's book, and much like the first Percy Jackson, it really isn't without its flaws. It does have quite a few flaws, but I think it's a great story that can go beyond them. I'm really excited to see where the author takes this story in her follow-up book. Number 7. White Trash Warlock. White Trash Warlock is like reading a Dresden Files book, where the main character is a gay man rather than a straight pervy warlock. While it doesn't quite deliver with the same punch as Jim Butcher's series, and I do think the story is trying to do a little too much too soon, it was a very promising story to read, and it was something I'm eager to see how it's followed up in its next book. Perhaps you might see me review that later, but I do like the main character, and for once in one of these gay romances between the two male leads, the romance isn't entirely about their physical chemistry, and the thread is actually a pretty interesting one. It plays with the more Eldritch-style monsters than just a plain monster. As I said, and as is common with levels 10 to 5 of my best books, there are still some issues that I think might be deal breakers for a few people, but I definitely recommend this book to any fans of urban fantasy. Number 6. Star Wars: Twilight Company. When it comes to video game books, they typically go one of two ways. Either they're clearly just trying to market off the name recognition of the game, doing very little work to actually add to a new story to the world that I'm familiar with to expand the scope of the story, or they actually try. And the next few entries are going to reflect the latter more than the former, because, looking back on it, this was a pretty good year for reading books based on video games. Number 6 is Twilight Company from Star Wars, specifically because it's a tie-in novel to their first Battlefront game. While this book is far from perfect and is easily outclassed in about every other way from every other Star Wars book that I featured on Top 10 list, this book does tell a pretty interesting war story throughout it. We see the characters travel through the galaxy, fighting a war that we only see the mythical tales from, and seeing it from more of a grunt level. I like the characters who really got focused on, though admittedly I do wish that we had gotten some more on other characters. I think if I had read some of the short stories that the author had published, I might have loved this book even more, because apparently some of these characters are pulled straight from short stories that the author put out. But as it stands, I feel number 6 is a very good spot for where I'm putting this. Number 5. Kitchen Confidential. So I'm not going to lie and say that Kitchen Confidential by Anthony Bourdain being number 5 isn't heavily affected by some bias on my part. I'm not really a huge fan of biopics or biographies or things like that, truth be told, though I have been getting a little more appreciative of them as time goes on. And don't get me wrong, this book isn't here entirely because of bias, as I do like the insights that Anthony Bourdain offered of a time before celebrity chefs were really huge, of how kitchen culture used to be, and seeing him talk about his life before he became the No Reservations guy. I even have the edition where he republished it with a new foreword, written 10 years later, talking about the impact this book had on his life and rethinking some of the opinions he mentioned in this, such as regressing a bit on his hate of certain celebrity chefs like Emil Lagasse or Jamie Oliver. But honestly, the real reason I like this book so much is it sort of reconnected me with my dad a bit. I bought this exact book for him on his birthday over a decade ago now. In 2020, he ended up dying. Not to COVID, but due to heavy alcohol abuse. It's actually part of the reason I got back into reading, because as I was clearing out his house, I found a lot of my old books. Anyways, I started reading this book before the end of 2025, picking it up in August, a couple of days after the anniversary of his death. My dad was never really an emotional guy. So it was always weird to me seeing how hard he took the death of Anthony Bourdain. He treated it almost like a close friend of his had died, and reading through the book, I think I kind of understand. I think my dad saw bits of himself in Anthony Bourdain. Being who he was, I can't say how much he saw himself in Bourdain, but the story itself brought me back to those times when my dad was alive and we'd sit on the couch and watch No Reservations. It was a painful book for me to read, but it is a good one even apart from that. I really do recommend just about anyone pick this up. Number 4. Minecraft The Crash. Minecraft The Crash by Tracy Baptiste is a continuing example of how surprisingly good the Minecraft novels have been. Ever since picking up The Island, the first official Minecraft novel written by the same guy who wrote World War Z, I've been impressed with how much effort each entry has had, with the end and the crash only improving on what I found in The Island. Heck, admittedly, I've even softened on my opinion greatly of the first book, as I feel, in hindsight, the book is perfect for readers. I still don't personally like it, but it does kind of make a bit of sense that the first official Minecraft novel should kind of read like someone's first attempt playing through Minecraft, right? In any case, The Crash is not better than the end, but it's still a surprisingly deep story about loss and grief for a book based on Minecraft. Considering the story is aimed at children, the book definitely handles things pretty well, and apart from a few instances where it's really clear the authors never really played the game, it's still a worthwhile book checking out. Maybe I'm being unfair because of how little one can expect from these books, so obviously doing something good is going to make it look like a much better book than if I expected more from it and it only did good. But so far, I think every book in the Minecraft series that I've reviewed on this channel is really worth the read. Number 3. Circle of Magic, Sandry's book. All things considered, I think the Circle of Magic book, Sandry's book, is something I should have read many years ago. This is a shockingly good book that I admittedly wasn't expecting much on, and if there was any magical school that I should have been obsessed with as a kid, I think it should have been this one. With 4 students, each of whom have their own motivations and backstory, and contribute in equal ways to the plots and themes, this story is about them not only finding the way, but finding themselves in the process. If I had one complaint about the book, is that its title, Sandry's book, does feel like a bit of a fib, since the book doesn't really feel like the character Sandry's story more so than any of the others. But this really is a good series. There's gay-coded characters in it, someone like Harry Potter, which relies a lot on its representation on after it's over retcons. You can actually see the representation in this book. And I'm willing to bet Landry isn't a transphobic asshole. So, personally, I really do recommend Circle of Magic books, especially for those trying to find new series to read after Harry Potter's author was revealed to be herself. Number 2. Babysitter of the Apocalypse. Specifically, the prequel novel, not the follow-up, We Don't Sacrifice Children to Zombies. Babysitter of the Apocalypse was a Kindle Unlimited series that I investigated shortly after diving into the End of Us series, in an effort to find a decent Kindle Unlimited book to read, and through reading the full length of the book was not exactly as exciting as I thought it'd be. It really did have a great start with the novella. This novella is a good tale of the barely functional alcoholic Vicky getting saddled with her neighbor's 2 kids in the middle of a zombie apocalypse, and attempting to protect them as they flee to the Canadian border. The story is very nice, and about the only complaint that I can throw at it is that the author felt like at the last minute she must have realized that she wanted to do more with these characters, and decided to abruptly override their happy ending in the last page of the book with little to no warning. It just kind of comes out of nowhere. At one point you're enjoying the end, and at the next it's like, oh my god, it's bad. And then all of a sudden they're not safe anymore. While I won't say reading the sequel is bad, I won't necessarily say it lived up to the hype this one gave me for being so good. So I definitely can recommend the prequel and just disregard the last page, and it would be a really good standalone work. Honorable mentions. Cyberpunk Blackout. Admittedly, one of the videos that stung me the most on my channel is the Cyberpunk Blackout video I did. Released in the midst of April, which is my video game month, it was meant to be a slow lead up to the cyberpunk novel No Coincidence. I put out this review with the resounding audience of 7 people for a great majority of its time on the internet. 2 of which I know were me and someone else who regularly watches my video. So naturally, that took a ton of the steam I had out for the other 2 comic reviews I'd planned to do, and the book I was reading. I ended up dropping them, thinking it was a case of a lack of interest in the series. And this hurt not just because of the pitiful numbers for the amount of work I put in, but because the Blackout comic was by and far the best of the comics I'd read that month. It's a story that somehow succeeds in both having a happy ending and a downer ending at the same time, leaving a lot up to interpretation at the end that it's fun to theorize. In addition, of the 3 comics that I had read, it is ultimately the best, with each one having a very disappointing ending that kind of marred all the great that came before it. At the end of the day, it's kind of one of those, I do recommend reading it, and I'm not blaming anyone for the low numbers of my videos. It's just kind of one of those, yeah, I wish more people would watch it, if anything else, to get recommended the book I gave them. Or, not that I gave them, recommending the book I read. Ultimate Spider-Man #1, Married with Children. This comic came at the end of 2025 for me, and honestly, I'm sad I waited that long to read it. A reinvention of the Ultimates line for Marvel, best known for its copious amounts of racism and cannibalism, Ultimate Spider-Man was always considered the best of that. And while I do like what the new Ultimates is going for, I think the Spider-Man is pretty great even apart from that. Featured in a world where Peter wasn't bit by a radioactive spider until much later in his life, we see a Peter Parker finding his identity as Spider-Man while married with children. It has an interesting take on the formula, where this time it's Uncle Ben who's alive while Aunt May passed away, with Kingpin in charge of the Daily Bugle. Honestly, it's worth a read, although I can't promise how the series is going to end just yet. I have pretty high hopes though. Halo First Strike. So Eric Nyland just seems to be the definitive writer of Halo in my mind. At least the books. When I mentioned The Flood a few years back, when I mentioned The Flood and did that review, one of the things that bothered me, and more so than any other, because every book I read of William C. Deeds seems to just reinforce the idea that I don't know how this guy got so much work. But anyways, Eric Nyland sort of took where Dietz left him and made a whole new book from it. Again, it really re-emphasizes the relationship between John and his fellow Spartan trainees. We get to see some of the tragedy of what happened at the Reach and the Spartan program being killed. We really get to see a lot of the things that you want to see from behind the scenes when it comes to Halo. These are the kind of books that are what's needed for something outside the games. And Nyland really did just step up again. While I won't say it's as good as his Fall of Reach book, First Strike was still really good, and I do really recommend it for any fans of Halo. But let's move on to #1, Dreadnought. So Dreadnought was one of these books I was always a little afraid to read. Not necessarily because of anything in the subject material, but largely because it's one of those books I was wondering, okay, is this book actually good? Or is this book just over-defended? Now, I mentioned a couple times in the past there are books I read. One book in such was Manhunt from a couple years ago, where that book was heavily recommended to me, and it was sold to me as a really good book. And when I read it, all I found was a book that's filled with hate and anger, and a splatterpunk work that just feels like a 300-something plus page Twitter argument on paper. So when I got to this, I was a bit more optimistic, and I can honestly say that it really delivers on its premise. I really like the struggles that our character Danny goes through, and honestly, while I do think a lot of the characters were a little too one-note for my liking, I do understand where the author is coming from. A lot of the characters are meant to be seen as representations of what trans people suffer through every day. Now, I do think that, again, they wasted some of the characters, but this is one of those things where I really do largely recommend picking up this book. Even apart from its themes, the way she wrote these action scenes are just genuinely great. It's one of those things that I've always been worried about when it comes to superhero books, like novels, is that how do you convey the awesomeness of a superhero fight on the written word without pictures? And April Daniels really just showed me it can be done. And overall, I really do just recommend reading this book. I don't want to spoil too much. I just pick it up. It's a good book. Now, I can't promise anything about the sequel yet, but we'll get there. But with that being said, yeah, That's all I got for you. That's the top 10 books of 2025 for me. Stick around. We know what list is coming next. Just remember, until next time, with every book comes an adventure. And these are the books whose adventures are most definitely worth having. See you later, everyone.